Have you ever wondered how many people pass by you every day, smiling? How many of these sympathetic masks hide something much darker than you could imagine? What if I told you that behind a simple drawing, a smiling face scrawled in a hurry on a bathroom wall, there was a real killer? Not a movie monster, not an urban legend, but a man of flesh and bone and thirst for blood. A serial killer who crossed the country killing and who, instead of fleeing justice, chose to provoke it. This is not just another murder story. It is a warning. It's a case so disturbing, so psychologically crooked, that not even the most experienced detectives have been able to grasp its real meaning for years. We're talking about a man who killed at least 8 women, perhaps more than 100, and who, instead of hiding his crimes, he wanted to be remembered by them. He left clues. He wrote confessions. He signed with a drawing, a smiling face. But why would anyone do that? Why would anyone want the whole world to know what they did? Because Keith Jesperson, the man behind the nickname Happy Face Killer, wasn't just a killer. He was terror dressed in normality, a family man, an ordinary truck driver, someone who could be by his side at the gas station, at the market, on the road. While thinking about how to kill his next victim, Jesperson used his work to traverse states. He was invisible. The victims, vulnerable women, often ignored by society, prostitutes, wanderers, homeless youth. He seduced them, gained confidence, and then the horror began. But unlike other serial killers, Jesperson didn't want to hide. He was irritated by the silence. He was bothered by the fact that no one noticed what he was doing. When they saw their first victim on the news and arrested the wrong men, he was furious. Not because he cared about justice, but because they wanted to give the glory of their crimes to someone else. That's when the letters began. Long, disturbing, full of details that only the killer could know. Sent to the police, to the press, to anyone who would listen. At the end of each one, he drew what would make him go down in history. A smiley face. Almost childish. Almost harmless. It's completely macabre. Think about it. A childish signature for the most brutal acts imaginable. As if he were laughing at the pain, laughing at the police, laughing at us. And the worst, worked. For years, no one paid attention. The police ignored the letters. The press thought it was a hoax. And Jesperson continued, killing, writing, smiling. That's the kind of story you don't see anywhere. It's not fiction. It's not creepypasta. It's real. And the scariest thing, what this case reveals about our society. How is it possible that someone with such a dark background, a violent childhood, abuse, clear signs of psychopathy, has gone unnoticed for so long? How did he manage to transform pain into narrative? How could he mock justice for so long, using only ink, paper, and a symbol? Keith Jesperson's case goes far beyond a criminal profile. It forces us to face uncomfortable questions. And if the monsters don't hide in the darkness, but do they walk among us in the light of day? What if the real horror is not in spirits or curses, but in the human mind, loose, disguised, smiling? Jesperson wasn't just a killer. He was a manipulator, an architect of fear. His letters were not confessions, they were provocations. He described the murders with surgical coldness. He detailed methods, places, thoughts. His words did not seek redemption, they sought attention. It was as if each crime was a show, and the world, its stage. And this stage grew. With each new letter, with each new victim, he fed his own mythology. They started calling him Happy Face Killer, and instead of stopping, he felt validated, as if he had finally achieved what he always wanted. To be seen, and the more he was ignored, killed the most. The most sinister of all is the symbolism. A smile, the greatest symbol of kindness. What we use to show empathy, sympathy, affection, being used as the trademark of evil. A cruel reminder that true evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes he smiles. Today, Jesperson is in prison, convict, serving several life sentences. But his story remains. And his trademark, the smile, still appears in the nightmares of those who knew his crimes up close. The case of the Happy Face Killer is one of the most disturbing in modern criminal history, because he didn't just want to kill, he wanted to be remembered. And now that you know the beginning of this story, you need to get ready, because what comes next is even darker. You're about to step into the mind of a man who turned the act of killing into a performance, in a game, in a legacy. Stay with me, because understanding this case is more than knowing the facts. It's facing the darker side of human nature. But what happens when that smile isn't just a dash on a napkin or a signature on a child's notebook? It's the hallmark of a serial killer. The story you're about to hear is more than just a murder case. It's a suffocating plunge into real horror, a tale that mixes pure psychopathy with a strange need for recognition. A case where the thirst for killing went hand in hand with vanity, where each disfigured face was followed by a disturbingly childish signature, a happy face. Keith Hunter Jesperson was born in 1955, in what looked like a typical quiet Canadian town, on the outside. But inside her home, a home that was supposed to be one of protection, there was no love, no calm. His father, a strong alcoholic and violent man, dictated the rules with fists and shouts. It was like living inside a pressure cooker about to explode. Children had no voice, no time. His mother, submissive, was silenced by fear and tradition. And in the midst of this chaos, little Keith grew like a shadow, quiet, ignored, but with eyes that saw everything. Keith's first emotional scars didn't just come from physical punishment. They came from indifference, contempt, the constant feeling of not belonging. He was not his favorite son. In fact, it always seemed to be left over. His first memory, as he describes it, was brutal. Him, at the top of a slide, spotting his younger brother at the bottom, and without thinking twice, dropping a rock that hit the child's head. An act that, for many, would seem just a childish prank. But that, in the right context, was the first gasp of something much darker. Jesperson's childhood was marked by an unsettling duality. On one side, he had his dog, Duke, the only being with whom he claimed to feel true love. On the other, his obsession with pain and death intensified every year. He took care of an injured crow, called it Blackie, made a nest for it, until he saw him tortured to death by his brothers. And what happened next? Keith felt no sadness. He felt angry, an anger that grew and began to demand sacrifices. It started with birds, then cats, then dogs. Sometimes he would tie the tails of two cats together with wire and watch as they attacked each other until one of them died. He mentally wrote down every reaction, every spasm, every meow of despair. All this, still in childhood. But the violence was not limited to animals. Jesperson was excluded at school, seen as strange, too big, too quiet. This isolated him even more. And with isolation came fantasies. At the age of 10, he tried to kill a friend by strangling him behind the garage of his home. The boy only survived because Keith's father intervened. But at that moment, something changed. Keith reports that it was the first time his personality split. There appeared an other part, the dark part, the one who felt no remorse, the one that would control the following years of his life. During his adolescence, Keith deepened into this inner abyss. He was fascinated by pain, by death, by power. He couldn't connect with women. He felt rejected and inferior. And in response, he began to feed increasingly dark fantasies about control, about domination, about making them pay for everything the world made him feel. And like many psychopaths, he didn't just want to kill, he wanted to make people suffer. His first human victim was Tanya Bennett, a sweet, kind woman who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. They met at a bar. Tanya was the kind of person who hugged strangers, smiled at everyone, and that was enough to attract Jesperson's attention. He took her to his ex-girlfriend's house, who was traveling. There, he invited her in. There was still no clear plan, but desire, yes. She tried to flee when he advanced. He grabbed her, raped her, and then he beat her face until there was no trace of humanity left. But the worst came later. He went to the kitchen, prepared a coffee, and wondered what he would do with the body. The coldness of the moment contrasts with the brutality of what had just happened. There was no regret, just calculation. That night, Keith scattered the victim's remains. He left the body in one place, the belongings in another. It was like a macabre game of treasure hunting. And then, to be safe, he returned to the bar. He needed witnesses. He needed to be seen, to build his own alibi's armor. But something strange happened. Police arrested two innocent men for the crime. They confessed, apparently pressured, desperate, or perhaps seeking to reduce penalties for other crimes. Jesperson saw this, and something inside him exploded. Not of remorse, of frustration. That was his work, your crime, your signature. He wanted the credit. He wanted to be remembered. It was then that he began to write anonymous letters to the media and the police, and in each letter, a happy face. The same one you see on children's stickers, on t-shirts. But now, sinister. Now, dirty with blood. Keith felt invincible. He killed and disappeared. He wrote and mocked the authorities. He believed himself to be a criminal mastermind. And for a while, he really was. The letters were disturbing. Intimate details about the bodies, the places, the clothes, information that only the killer could know. But no one believed them. After all, the culprits were already in prison. And meanwhile, Keith went on with his life, traveling as a truck driver, the perfect profession for a roving assassin. He stopped at motels, roadside bars, met vulnerable victims, women in precarious situations, often sex workers, sometimes just lost. He offered a ride, conversation, safety, and then darkness took over. One by one, he took them out of the world, and with more and more pleasure, more control. And then the signature, the smiling face, as if to say, "Thank you for playing." Each new murder seemed to fuel not only his bloodlust, but also his ego. Keith Jesperson didn't just want to kill, he wanted to make his mark. As if he were an author proud of his own work, his greatest desire was to see his name stamped in newspapers, in the news, in books. But with that, his arrogance also grew, and the risk. In 1990, just a few months after the brutal murder of Tanya Bennett, he struck again. His new victim was an unknown woman, one of those figures invisible to society, with no fixed whereabouts, no close family. These were his favorites. After all, the less connection to the world, the less chance you have of tracking it. He killed her with the same meticulous coldness as always, throwing the body by the side of the road as if discarding a worthless object. And once again, the happy face appeared, drawn, written, or suggested. An almost childish signature, but completely sadistic. Jesperson felt more and more secure. The police could not even link him to the crimes. The investigators were blind while he saw everything clearly. He saw weakness in the system. He saw holes in forensic methods. And more than that, he saw an empty stage that cried out for his horror show. Meanwhile, the two innocent men arrested for the murder of Tanya Bennett continued to serve time. And even though he had already sent confessions, no one seemed to want to listen. It was as if his existence remained irrelevant, as if the world was not ready to know him. This infuriated him. He wanted attention, not any attention. He wanted to be feared, known, revered, as Ted Bundy, like the Zodiac, like the great names of crime that marked generations. That's when he decided to climb. Between 1991 and 1994, Keith murdered at least 5 more women. Some he found at truck stops, others in rundown motels. He had a routine. He seduced with sympathy, gained confidence, and then attacked. Sometimes rape came first. Other times the murder was immediate. But in all cases, the feeling was the same: absolute control. Jesperson fed on the fear of the victims. He breathed despair. And soon after, he returned to ordinary life. He hit the road, he ate in cafeterias, he slept at gas signs, stations, as if nothing had happened. But not everything was so perfect. The weight of the crimes, the faces of the victims, especially that of Tanya, the first, began to haunt him. On the outside, he continued to smile. Inside, it was a battlefield. Sometimes he considered giving himself up. Other times, he thought about killing himself. With each new murder, he got closer to psychological collapse. But still, he couldn't stop. And what's scarier, he didn't even want to. During this time, he began to get involved with a woman named Julie. They traveled together, slept in the truck's hitchhiker, shared meals. Julie believed she was living a road romance, but she had no idea she shared a bed with a monster. Jesperson even tried to be someone better. He tried to contain his impulses. But darkness was always lurking, waiting for a slip. And when Julie started asking for money, threatening him with false accusations, something inside him snapped. History repeated itself. He tied her up. He raped her. He killed her. And this time, the remorse was real. Not because he had taken a life. It no longer affected him. But because when he killed her, he knew he was more exposed than ever. Julie was known. Friends knew they were together. People knew where they had traveled. And inevitably, he would be the first suspect. Keith tried to flee. He moved to another city. He tried to continue with the work. But the siege began to close. His fellow truck drivers began to avoid him. Strange signs appeared. He felt that he was being followed. Paranoid, exhausted, and, for the first time, truly afraid, he decided to do something drastic. He wrote a letter to his brother. He confessed everything. All the murders, all the details, the happy face, the discarded bodies, the fantasies, the unsolved crimes. He asked them to destroy the letter. But the brother, astonished, showed everything to the police. And then, Jesperson was arrested. The mask has fallen. Even in custody, he seemed more relieved than sorry. He confessed everything with ease. He gave details that only the killer would know. And most of all, he kept bragging, laughed, he ironized. He joked with the media. He said that he had killed more than 100 women, maybe 160, a number that has never been proven. But just imagining it gives you goosebumps to the bone. His crimes shocked the United States. The smiling face, the same one we see in emojis, on keychains, on notebook covers, would never be the same again. He had kidnapped a symbol of innocence and transformed it into an emblem of horror. And the most disturbing? It's just that he's not the only one. The smiling face. This symbol, simple and almost childish, began to become the macabre signature of a monster. Keith Jesperson, the silent trucker, was far from just an ordinary man looking for redemption after a divorce or a second chance at life. No, he was driven by something darker, an almost obsessive need to be recognized, to be feared, to be remembered. And the world was slowly beginning to understand this. After the brutal murder of Tanya Bennett, Jesperson became restless, not because of guilt, but because of the absence of attention. 2 innocent people had been charged with the crime. They were behind bars, and the police seemed pleased. But for Jesperson, this was intolerable. He needed the world to know that this barbaric act, this senseless death, had been his doing. And then the game began. He wrote a letter to the press. He did not sign with his name. Instead, at the bottom of the page, he drew a happy little face, a smiling, almost mocking face, as if mocking the very idea of justice. And it didn't stop there. He sent more letters. He detailed the crimes, laughed at the mistakes of the police, insulted the investigators. It was as if he were directing his own horror show, and the audience, the authorities, the media, the people, were just passive spectators. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to turn horror into entertainment. What makes it all the more disturbing is the way Jesperson described the murders. There was no remorse. There was technique. He talked about strangulation as if he were describing a recipe. Each victim was handpicked. Prostitutes, vulnerable women, forgotten by society, easy to manipulate, difficult to track. It was as if he was creating a pattern, and within that pattern, every smiling face he left behind was a cruel reminder that the real monster was still on the loose. His double life continued. Truck driver by day, murderer by night. Deserted roads, truck stops, roadside motels. All of these became his hunting ground. Each new city was a new opportunity, and in each crime he left more clues, more provocations. On one occasion he left a note in a public restroom. Another time he wrote a letter detailing where he had left the body, always with the same symbol at the end, the smile of death. But Jesperson was not limited to one city or state. He was a nomad, a predator on the move. This made its capture almost impossible. The crimes took place in different locations, under different jurisdictions, and the connection between them was almost non-existent, except of course through the letters. And even these, for a long time, were ignored. The police believed that he was a prankster, a lunatic in search of fame. They never imagined that he was the murderer himself, writing proudly about his atrocities. Meanwhile, his personal life was falling apart. Divorced, with children he barely saw, Jesperson felt even more isolated, and that only fueled his anger. Anger at the women who rejected him, anger at the society that ignored him, anger at a world that insisted on not seeing him. So, he killed. And with each new victim, he felt more in control, more powerful. It was as if he were daring the world to stop him, but no one did. One of his victims was found with clear signs of torture. Jesperson described in his letters how he had had fun prolonging the woman's suffering, as if it were a macabre work of art. He wanted us to know how much she screamed, how much she begged, how much fun he had. And he wanted us to know that no one could stop him. It was as if he was saying, I am the monster you pretend doesn't exist. But something began to change. The media finally started paying attention to the letters. An investigative reporter noticed the coincidences, the details that only the killer could know. They began to put the pieces together. The smiley face, which once looked like a simple scribble, was now the link between the murders. It was the signature of a serial killer, and the hunt had begun. But Jesperson, like every narcissist, couldn't contain himself. He wanted more. He wanted total control of the narrative. In one of his last letters, he wrote, "You have no idea who you are looking for. I can be your neighbor, the man who fixes his car, or the truck driver who passes through his city, smiling." And that's exactly what made Keith Jesperson so dangerous. He was invisible, camouflaged in the banality of American routine, an ordinary face with an ordinary smile, hiding the most unimaginable horrors. And then, almost as a theatrical final act, Jesperson decided to turn himself in, but even that was calculated. Before presenting himself to the police, he wrote a confession letter to his brother. He detailed each murder, every face he saw erased, every smile he left behind. He asked them to destroy the letter. But the brother, perhaps seized by dread, perhaps by a sense of justice, turned everything over to the police. And at that moment, the happy face killer finally got the name he wanted to see in the newspapers. But the story doesn't end there, because behind each of these deaths, there are unanswered questions. There are holes in the narrative, victims who may never have been identified. And the most disturbing of all, what if Jesperson isn't telling the whole truth? He claimed to have killed more than 160 people. But how many of these deaths actually happened? How many are still buried, forgotten, somewhere in the American vastness? Every stretch of road can hide a secret. Each truck stop may have been the scene of unspeakable horror, and every smiling face scrawled on a wall. It can be more than a joke. It may be a warning, a cruel reminder that evil does not wear a hood, nor does it hide in the shadows. Evil could be wearing a uniform, driving a truck, smiling at you around the next corner. With each new letter, Jesperson not only confessed but also taught. He showed us how predators hide, how they manipulate, how they play with justice as if it were a game, and perhaps most terrifying is that he succeeded. For years, he won. He killed, mocked, escaped. And us? We watched, powerless, mesmerized by the trail of horror he left behind. But the question that remains, and that we may never have the courage to answer is, did he really stop? It was as if he was possessed by something dark, as if inside that burly, seemingly ordinary man, there dwelt another entity, cold, calculating, and hungry for control. Keith Hunter Jesperson didn't see himself as just a killer. He saw himself as two. In his own words, it was as if two people lived inside me. One of them took her children for a walk. The other one tortured, killed, and then slept as if nothing had happened. It was this insane duality that made him even more dangerous. It wasn't just evil. It was an emotional emptiness, a hunger for notoriety. Jesperson wanted to be remembered. He wanted the world to know of his existence, not like just anyone, but like a monster laughing at justice as he left bodies in his wake. The signature was simple, a smiling face drawn in blue paint, always accompanied by letters sent to newspapers, courts, police stations. He wrote as if confessing to a bad joke, mocking the police, describing the crimes in great detail, and making it clear that he regretted nothing. The letters were accompanied by maps, names, dates. He wanted them to know. I needed them to know. Keith Jesperson did not kill on impulse. He killed for control. He wanted to be the screenwriter of the legend himself. The media, at first, did not pay much attention. That seemed ridiculous. A killer sending letters with happy faces? It sounded like a farce. But as the bodies appeared, always vulnerable women, prostitutes, wanderers, girls no one would miss, the pattern began to scream, always strangled. Sometimes there were signs of post-mortem abuse. Others, the bodies were disposed of with almost clinical coldness. But what did not change was the almost childlike desire to be seen, recognized, feared. Jesperson wanted to be a figure, a symbol, a shadow. And that's exactly what he became, a shadow that moved along the roads of the United States, hidden behind the wheel of a truck. The job as a freight driver gave him everything he needed: mobility, anonymity, and easy access to victims. In each city, an opportunity. At each truck driver stop, a chance to satisfy that hunger that did not cease. And most disturbingly, he was discreet. His colleagues said that Jesperson was calm, even gentle. But behind the fake smile and soft-spoken, there was a man who collected deaths like someone who collects stamps. The motivation? Many would say it was hatred. Others, sadism. But there was something darker, a desperate need to be noticed. Each murder was a message. Each letter, a cry of "look at me." Jesperson seemed less interested in the violence itself and more in the repercussions. It was as if each crime was an episode of a macabre show, and the whole world its audience. But when no one paid attention, he freaked out. I needed to raise the tone. He needed to do something even more shocking. It is at this point that psychological theories begin to emerge. Some experts believe that Jesperson did not see himself as an ordinary psychopath. He saw himself as a misunderstood genius, an artist of horror, someone above the law. For him, the murders were manifestations of his power, his superiority. When two innocent men were arrested for one of their crimes, Jesperson felt no guilt. He felt envy. How dare they steal his show? That's when the letters began, detailed confessions with signatures drawn as if they were mocking smiles. The obsession with being recognized gained strength. Jesperson began to leave clues. He began to challenge the detectives publicly. In one of his letters, he described exactly where he had left the belongings of one of the victims. And when the police found them, there was no doubt. It was him. And yet, he was still free. It was as if the system itself was afraid to confront him. He was always one step ahead. And each new murder only made the game more insane. But there was something even more unsettling. Many of the bodies Jesperson claimed to have left behind were never found. And the dates didn't match. The locations were vague. Some victims, he didn't even know the name. This raised a disturbing question. Did he really kill all those women? Or was part of it a delusion of grandeur? A construct to feed your sick ego? This doubt divided investigators. Some believe he exaggerated. Others think the truth is even darker, that he killed far more than he confessed, that there are buried, forgotten bodies that will never be found. Between theories and investigations, the image of the happy face killer grew. The press finally began to cover the cases, and Jesperson delighted in each report. But he wanted more. I wanted a name. I wanted them to talk about him like they talked about Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy. I wanted to be part of the elite of monsters. And for that, it needed to be shocking. His letters began to include grotesque details, descriptions of how he watched his victims die, how I took pleasure in seeing life slip from their eyes, and, above all, how he knew he would never be caught, unless he wanted to. He saw himself as untouchable, a god of chaos on American roads. And maybe it was. For years it escaped. For years he killed at will. For years justice has failed. But this sense of absolute control also left him careless. In one of his last murders, Jesperson was seen with the victim in public. Too many people knew. Friends of the woman confirmed the relationship. Everything indicated that this time he had left traces. And he knew it. Panic began to grow. Paranoia took over. He could no longer sleep. He began to think about surrendering, to end it all, but not before ensuring that his story was told, in his own way. He wrote more letters. He sent more clues. He spoke like someone who writes a script. He wanted the world to know, but he wanted to control the narrative. After all, what is a monster without an audience? This obsessive need for attention is a pattern in many serial killers. But in Jesperson, it, was almost childish. He wanted applause. He wanted to be feared and loved at the same time. I wanted to be the main character in America's greatest horror story. And, in a way, he succeeded. Even today, his name causes goosebumps. Even today, the smiling face he wore as a signature is a reminder that evil can have many faces, and sometimes, one of them smiles. But the most sinister is yet to come, because Jesperson, even after he was captured, even behind bars, continued to write. He kept confessing. He kept trying to manipulate the narrative, and doubts arise. Had he killed more than he admitted? Would he have partners? Do any of the bodies found recently have anything to do with him? Or is there a new happy face killer walking the roads today, inspired by the horrors of the original? Write in the comments what you think. Do you believe that Keith Jesperson told the truth about all of his victims? Or did he create an even darker legend to immortalize himself as one of the greatest serial killers in American history? Write the word double if you believe he really had two personalities. It helps the channel and shows that you're steeped in this mystery as much as I am. Now, get ready, because in the next part, we'll dive even deeper into the personal hell Keith created with each new murder, and the impact he left on the victims, the investigators, and throughout the country. He was tired of the road, tired of running, tired of living in a world where his atrocities went unnoticed. Keith Hunter Jesperson no longer just wanted to kill. He wanted to be heard, recognized, remembered. Its victims were not enough. The deaths no longer filled that monstrous void within him. It was as if the silent screams of the women he strangled weren't loud enough, as if the world wasn't paying attention, and that, for him, was unbearable. As he drove his truck across the United States, his crimes became more frequent, bolder, more brutal. He no longer bothered to hide the bodies so carefully. On the contrary, he began to leave clues, small subscriptions, a pattern, a grotesque, almost childish, but extremely disturbing signature, a simple smiley face. a cruel irony. He painted the horror with a smile. And this symbol came to accompany the confessions he made anonymously in letters sent to the press, where he detailed crimes that only the real killer could know. He wanted the credit. He wanted the glory of being feared. He wanted his name engraved among the greatest murderers in American history. And for a while, he succeeded. The most unsettling thing is how he manipulated everything around him. The media, the police, the very narrative of his crimes. Her ability to look ordinary, a truck driver, a father, a quiet-looking ex-husband, contrasted shockingly with the accounts of torture, rape, and murder. This dissonance between appearance and reality only made everything more frightening. Who would have thought that such an ordinary face hid such a corrupted soul? Jesperson began to show signs that he was about to surrender. He tried to kill himself. He sent letters to his brother revealing his crimes, asking him to destroy everything before the police found out. But it was too late. His desire to be famous outweighed his desire to remain free. He needed the world to know. He needed someone to recognize his work. Then he confessed. He called the police and told them about the murder of his last victim. But he went further. He revealed a list. He confessed to 8 murders, officially, but he insinuated that he had killed many more. According to his own words, the real number of victims could exceed 160. Hundreds of women killed, hundreds of lives snuffed out by a man obsessed not only with death, but with the memory she would leave. Does it give you goosebumps? Because it should. That's where the real terror lies. Not in the act itself, but in the intention behind it. Jesperson was not just any psychopath. He was an architect of fear, someone who built a legend with corpses and smiles. And the most chilling thing, he wanted to be admired for it. Today, he is behind bars, sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. He ages slowly in a cell where there is no applause, no fame, no smiling faces. But does that stop him from smiling? Hard to know. What we do know is that his legacy continues. The smiley face became a symbol of something much more perverse, a grim reminder that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they're in the driver's seat, offering you a ride. And even after being caught, Jesperson didn't stop. He continued writing. He continued bragging. He continued to feed his unhealthy vanity with interviews, books, and confessions. It has become the subject of series, documentaries, and debates among criminology experts. Some call him an extreme narcissist. Others say that he is just an opportunistic psychopath. But one thing is certain, he got what he wanted. He was remembered. But did he deserve it? Should we feed the fame of monsters like him? Or is this the price we pay for trying to understand the mind of a murderer? This story, in addition to being real, forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always come with warning. Evil does not always throb in the dark. Sometimes evil smiles, with yellow teeth, with empty eyes, with clear intentions. What if Jesperson is telling the truth? What if there are dozens, hundreds of bodies that have never been found? Women who disappeared without a trace? Forgotten victims of a killer who knew how to erase traces, but who paradoxically longed to leave them. Imagine how many families still mourn their daughters without knowing what happened. How many unsolved mysteries do Keith's footprints hide? And more. If he could hide it so well, for so long, how many other happy face killers are out there right now? How many are on the road? How many are in the markets, on the subway, in line at the bank? That's why stories like this need to be told, not just for the shock, not only because of morbidity, but because of the need to see what is just ahead, and that out of fear, we insist on ignoring. Maybe you're thinking, but he's stuck. It's okay now. Is it really? The legacy of horror does not end with the arrest of the killer. He lives in the details, in the errors of the investigation, in the years that 2 innocent people spent in prison while the real culprit mocked justice. It lives in the failures of the system, in the ignored smiles, in the calls for help that were never heard. And perhaps above all, the greatest horror is not in Jesperson's crimes, but in our reaction to them, in the way we consume these stories as entertainment, how we got used to the absurd, how desensitized we become to suffering, as long as it's narrated with a haunting soundtrack and black and white imagery. But here's the truth. Every name, every face, every victim, it was a real life. There were dreams, plans, laughter, smells, stories, and they were brutally erased by someone who wanted to be famous, by someone who believed that a smiley face was enough to mark the world. Now, I want to know what you think about it. Do you believe that Jesperson spoke the truth about the 160 victims? Or was it all just a big lie to inflate his own ego? Write in the comments. I saw his smile. If you've made it this far and want to make your mark on this video, this is the password. I want to know who stayed until the end. I want to see who really understood the weight of this story, and if this story gave you goosebumps, made you think, or simply made you uncomfortable. Subscribes to the channel, because the next case we're going to bring is even more disturbing. An unsolved mystery, a supernatural crime, a real terror, the kind that makes you lock the door at night and look twice in the rearview mirror. See you in the next episode. Until then, be careful. Who smiles? Because sometimes it's just that smile that hides the true face of evil.